Well, good evening and welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight for this virtual town hall with 6 members of Northern Virginia's delegation to the Virginia General Assembly. My name is Steve Gale, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the Northern Virginia Committee of the Jewish Community Relations Council of Greater Washington, better known as the JCRC. The JCRC is the public affairs and community relations voice of the organized Jewish community, representing tens of thousands of families and individuals throughout the Commonwealth and the region. We work to strengthen our community through legislative advocacy, grassroots mobilization, as well as intergroup, interfaith, and educational outreach initiatives. Since October 7th, our work supporting Jewish life in Northern Virginia has become more urgent, more complicated, and more focused. Following the murder of 2 young professionals leaving an event at the Capitol Jewish Museum in DC, police and sheriff's departments and elected officials around the region were quick to check in with us, to step up security measures, and to let us know that they were looking to support the local Jewish community. Tonight is an opportunity for the Jewish community to connect with members of our Jewish community who represent Northern Virginia in Richmond. Thank you to Senate Majority Leader Scott Sorovell, Senator Adam Evan, Caucus Chair Kathy Tran, Delegate Marcus Simon, and Delegate Laura J. Cohn, as well as Delegate Alonso Lopez. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Several other state and local elected officials are in the audience tonight. Delegate Vivian Watts, Delegate Irene Shin, Loudoun County Chair Phyllis Randall, and Fairfax County School Board Member Melanie Merrin. Thanks to all of you for participating tonight. Thank you to the more than 170 community members who've registered for this opportunity. First, a few logistical matters before we get into the program. This program is being recorded. Closed captioning is available. Each of you should be able to turn it on from your own screens. In an effort to make sure we have time to hear from each of our elected officials and to cover multiple topics, we will not ask each of our guests to weigh in on every single topic. Instead, we will begin tonight's program asking each of you to comment on a particular topic of concern. And with the time remaining, we invite participants to ask questions or share short stories of your experiences of anti-Semitism or barriers you may have experienced living Jewishly by using the Q&A box or by raising the hand function. We'll do our best to get to as many people as we can. We are honored that Delegate Lopez was able to rearrange his schedule at the last minute to join us and provide a brief overview, if he will be so kind, of this legislative agenda. As I know you can only stay for a short limited time, over to you, Delegate Lopez, and thank you.
Thank you. My name is Alfonso Lopez. I represent Arlington and Alexandria. And I'm chair of the Agriculture, Chesapeake, and Natural Resources Committee, which deals with most of the environmental issues in the state.
Delegate Lopez, I think we're having a hard time.
Chair of the Workforce and Labor Subcommittee of the. Can you hear me now?
I think we had a bad connection. Yes.
I'm sorry. Okay, hold on. I have to go. I apologize. I wanted to be here and show my support. I have to go to an assisted living facility and do a presentation there now in a few minutes. But I wanted to very clearly say how important the JCRC is to all of us in the community, how very important it is to, to have these town halls to talk about these issues, especially during this critical time. I would leave because of my connection, I'll leave it to Marcus or Kathy Tran, our caucus chair, to sort of answer the question about what the session is going to be like. I apologize about the link, and I apologize if the sound is off. But thanks for the opportunity to be here, and I appreciate all of you guys doing this.
Thank you very much, Delegate Lopez. We appreciate your rearranging everything. We know everyone here has a busy schedule, so thank you. I would now like to turn to Leader Soraville with our first concern, one that has been in the news and on the minds of anyone with children or grandchildren in thinking about college. I know I have 2 grandchildren, and I think about that all the time, where they will go to school and what they will face when they go there. Prior to the surge of anti-Semitic activity on colleges' campuses since October 7th, we have seen growing anti-Semitic and anti-American curriculum followed in a number of academic departments, with academic boycotts of Israel repeatedly threatened and adopted by a variety of faculties and departments. This combination threatens not only today's students, but also poisons education and civic engagement for years to come. So the first question is, what is the General Assembly's role in ensuring that Virginia's colleges and university campuses are safe and welcoming for Jewish students and for all students, and are not promoting anti-Semitic or anti-American curriculum? Thank you.
Hey, Steve, thank you for the question. And it's always good to be here with JCRC. It's been a while since I've been with you all, and it's always a pleasure to come. My grandparents moved to Fairfax County from Brooklyn in 1936, and they were not welcome when they came to the county. They were very different. Fairfax County had about 25,000 people in it, and my grandparents basically were very mistreated for a long period of time. Probably till about the 50s or the 60s when things started, I guess, normalizing and doing the thing. I heard all those stories. I never thought that I was going to have to revisit a lot of the things that my grandparents told me about with my children. But, I found myself sitting in my living room one night watching the Unite the Right rally on UVA's campus with these men with torches chanting, the Jews will not replace us. And my son, who was then, I think he was in either elementary school or middle school, looked at me and I was like, Dad, why are they saying that? And it was not a conversation that I ever expected to have with my child. I thought our country was way past these kinds of things. And my children faced anti-Semitic slurs in high school. I had a hard time getting my high school principal to finally address it. These are problems I think many of us experience, but I don't think there's a lot of public knowledge about it. In terms of the General Assembly's role, I would say that, first of all, I think it's important to note that we already adopted the working definition of anti-Semitism adopted by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance on May 26th, 2016. We did that a couple of years ago. We also made assaulting and battering somebody due to their ethnicity a hate crime. We did that about 2 years ago. So we already took those actions. In terms of additional legislative activity, I think one other thing we need to really look at carefully is looking at doxing based on somebody's ethnicity, having enhanced penalties for that. So that I'm not sure how much different it is whether you assault and batter somebody based on ethnicity versus whether you threaten them with physical violence by electronically, by text, by phone, by internet, or whatever, whether that ought not to be treated as equally as offensively as an assault and battery, which is typically a minor touching. We're not talking about a malicious wounding, and assault and battery is a relatively minor touching, but we ought to have enhancements for that, I think. That's something we ought to look at legislatively. Beyond those kinds of things, I think we as legislators have a duty to provide proper oversight for our campuses. I don't think it's appropriate for us to necessarily micromanage curriculum, but it's important for us to exercise oversight authority in terms of ensuring that our boards of visitors and our universities maintain a safe and welcoming environment on our campuses. They properly balance academic freedom with institutional responsibility. We oversee public investment correctly. But you know, micromanaging leads to a Christmas tree, which I think is very hard to manage once we start going down that road. But I think you can exert influence in terms of the kinds of people who sit on our boards of visitors, the kinds of leadership our institutions have. Just to give you an example, the members on this call, led by Senator Eben, we all just sent a letter to public letter supporting the presence of George Mason due to the action in the wake of anti-Semitic action activities that happened on George Mason's campus, showing that George Mason is taking steps and fighting anti-Semitism on the campus. And so I think we have a bully pulpit role we can exercise. And I think it's important that we do that. I think our country has often lost, I think, have lost the distinction between criticizing Israel as a country versus equating criticism of Israel as criticism of Jews. I don't think a lot of people understand that being Jewish is also an ethnicity and not just a religion. I think it's important that we continue to make sure people understand these things, and they understand the perspective of what Israel went through on October the 7th. That the 1,300 people that were murdered that day would be the equivalent of about 10,000 people in America. And that, you're talking about a country that has the size, the width of what is effectively an average commute in Northern Virginia. I just don't think a lot of people realize the scope and scale and the context. It's important for us as elected officials of the bully pulpit we have to make that known. So I would say that's sort of I guess, as brief as I can, an oversight of some of the things that I think we can do as legislators. And I look forward to continuing to work with the JCRC and the Jewish community, do all we can to stop what is clearly a rising tide of anti-Semitism in this country. Because I think it's bad, but it also presents an opportunity for us as Jews to try to reaffirm our bonds with other communities and make people aware of what anti-Semitism really is.
Thank you, Senator Sorovell. I'd like to ask Scott Persky to now unmute yourself and turn on your camera.
Hey, Laura Jean, how are you? It's great to see you. I haven't seen you in a bit. So I have a question for you that's kind of right in your wheelhouse, I think, about K-12 education. Obviously, anti-Semitism in schools was a thing before October 7th, but it's obviously become much, much worse since then. Students and teachers are all subject to, or frequently subject to slurs and graffiti and harassment. My kids face that in school. I think if Dan were here, he'd tell you that Harrison saw the same thing. He's a classmate of theirs. And, on the one hand, they're tormented with swastikas and Hitler jokes that, obviously aren't funny. And then on the other hand, they're being told that, hey, Zionists are Nazis and that the only Jews that are okay are those that are the non-Zionist Jews. And these are really overt actions, but I think they're exacerbated by ignorance. And even well-meaning teachers, administrators who just don't know or don't understand or recognize these clearly anti-Semitic references. So, I think in their best intention, they're looking to present like that balance, the so-called balance of showing the other side of anti-Semitism. But I think also they just have a lack of curricular resources available to them. I can't think of a stronger exclamation point on this than the recent vote by the National Education Association to ban partnerships with ADL and really other very mainstream Jewish organizations. So, just before you joined the board, the school board, I had actually talked to the head of curriculum for social studies at Fairfax County, and she was really the one who educated me on how important the state level is when it comes to curriculum. So, my question for you is, how can the GA ensure that the state's curriculum isn't erasing Jewish history, our story, and ensure that educators are sufficiently knowledgeable about Jewish students and teachers and their fellow faculty members?
Well, first, I have to send my love to the Persky family. I had the great fortune of getting to teach one Ruby Persky many years ago in preschool, and it was one of, I would say, the top 5 highlights for me as a school board member to then have Ruby come and testify in front of the school board. And I don't think I can take any credit for it. I imagine it had something to do with her incredible parents, but it was just one of the coolest experiences of my life. I think of a few things. I think one, I just say we were just at an event here for Ghazala Hashmi in Alexandria, and it's why you see several of us in our cars. And we did learn that the NEA as a group, as a larger body, that this recommendation came from a small committee, but that the NEA has now struck that down. So they will continue to partner with the ADL. So very grateful, very disappointed to see the media pick it up in a way that I think, in fairness, was a bit disingenuous. And I think that we are constantly seeing, I think, work to divide us, and it's not unique to Jews, certainly, but we're seeing it everywhere. So I'm very grateful for that. And as a former educator, some of our first calls, and I know Senator Hashmi said the same thing, that some of our first calls were to the Virginia Education Association, who assured us that they, whatever happened on the national level, that Virginia would not be following suit. And we try very hard to do what we can for our little corner of the country and the world. And so we're really heartened to hear that. I think from a K through 12 perspective, and I guess I would argue from a pre-K through 12 perspective, since that is my wheelhouse, teaching at a synagogue. I think I would say a few things. I think, one, in Fairfax County, we have been incredibly fortunate to partner with the JCRC, as you know, to do some incredible work in not just bringing Holocaust survivors and the next generation, their children or relatives, to come speak directly at some of our high schools, which has been incredible. I wish not necessary, but something that we certainly seem to have lost enthusiasm for in a lot of our school systems was bringing back people who could tell that first hand account of what happened to them and their family members. I've gotten to see twice it happen at West Springfield High School, and there's not a great way to describe how incredible and powerful, and for students who I would never have expected to be the first people to run up and speak to the survivors to say how they just had no idea. So that being the case, I think you're absolutely right that educating our educators is probably one of the first things that we need to do. And it's something that JCRC has been doing an incredible job of, really kind of doing a boot camp to have our teachers, better understand, I think, as you said, some of the coded language, but also just some of the experiences of being a Jewish student. We definitely saw it in conversations about the calendar, which I also think is a really important teaching opportunity. And we've seen it in our own home, of our kids talking about holidays that I certainly didn't grow up knowing about. And what a unique opportunity. So I think as a state level, the first thing I'm going to say, in a very partisan way that I shouldn't, but I can't help myself in this atmosphere that we're in, is that we have to have a governor who actually believes in public education and puts people in the Department of Education here in Virginia who believe in public education and believe in the power that it has in changing the world. And so it is incredibly important as a General Assembly for us to provide the whatever oversight we are able to in that. It's more important to us as voters in Virginia to make sure we elect people who share our values around public education. And in terms of curriculum, I do think there is a long way to go about how we have some of these conversations. My hope in Fairfax County is I continue to see, and a big shout out to my former colleague, Melanie Mirren, who's on the call, to see our school board be a champion of really wanting to showcase that Fairfax County can be a model of how we begin to do this work. We are not going to legislate our way or punish our way out of anti-Semitism, out of racism. I think those are valiant ideas and efforts. I certainly think they are a piece of it, but that is not what's going to change it. What's going to change it is these conversations and this education that we're able to provide to our students. So I think please know in the GA that we get it. Certainly, all of the folks on this call understand it. And so, we really look to provide oversight onto appointments for the next governor and who they put in these positions. And, as curriculum comes up for review, of making sure that we have people like JCRC at the table and on boards, and making sure that we're able to give as much input and feedback as possible to keep having this conversation in a constructive and meaningful way for educators and for students and families.
Thank you so much, Delegate Cohen. I'm going to now invite Cassandra Newell to unmute herself and turn on her camera.
Hello, everyone. And my question is for Senator Eben. First, I'd like to thank you, Senator, for your leadership and for your attendance at the recent Alexandria Holocaust Day of Remembrance. It was much appreciated. So my question for you, Senator, it's about BDS. The boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement aims to delegitimize, isolate, and economically devastate Israel. I was in Israel myself a year ago, and they are resilient and strong people, but they are definitely in need of our help. We see it pushed around the country in economic sectors as well as in academic institutions. In addition to the damage to Israel, BDS hampers the distribution of the incredible technological, medical, and other advances developed in Israel and by Israeli innovators. We have measures to prevent BDS from coming. My question for you, Senator, is why have measures to prevent the BDS movement from taking hold in Virginia not advanced in the General Assembly? Do you agree that BDS is a problem, and how can we counter and stop it? Thank you.
Thank you, Cassandra, for the question. I strongly disagree with the goals of the BDS movement, but I do support free speech rights, even for those I disagree with. In terms of BDS itself specifically, at least in Virginia, I think of it more as a tactic that's used by those who are trying to advance foreign policy discussions and give opponents of Israel a platform for debate. To my knowledge, there's been no Virginia-based government rulemaking body that has boycotted Israel. And when we discuss bills related to BDS, I think we provide a forum to those who want to attack or criticize Israel in their testimony at the microphone. The General Assembly itself has a long tradition of not engaging in foreign policy or even policy discussion that is solely federal in our 46 to 60-day legislative session. And in terms of our state pension funds, which is one avenue that those who would engage in BDS have used as a tactic before, our Constitution calls for our state pension funds to be invested based solely on projected financial returns rather than other considerations. So I guess that's a long way of saying that BDS has not emerged as a serious issue in Virginia, at least as of yet, and that I'm wary of giving, when we bring it up, we give the proponents of BDS a chance to speak up and say whatever they want at the microphone, in fairness, when we take testimony.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to ask Bob Budoff to now unmute himself and turn on his camera.
Good evening. I have a question for Delegate Simon. I have a narrower issue, but I think it's consistent with the other concerns raised here tonight. For many years, I've been a volunteer member of the Virginia Israel Advisory Board, and I know firsthand that the partnerships that Virginia and Israeli companies have had through the years have really been responsible for substantial economic growth in the Commonwealth. But in today's environment, with the dramatic rise in anti-Semitism, the erosion of support in the U.S. for Israel, and the Gaza war that never seems to end, I'm concerned about the future of the important commercial ties between the Commonwealth and Israel. And I would like to know what can be done to ensure that VIAB continues to strengthen those connections, and what can we do?
All right, well, thank you for the question. It's great to be here with you all tonight. And thank you all for having this forum, Vicki and everyone at the JCRC. And it's great to have this chance to talk to you all. I think the answer to your question, I think we need to kind of remind people, give them some context about VIAB. I mean, VIAB has been around the Virginia Israel Advisory Board for more than 35 years already. And it continues to get bipartisan support from the General Assembly because it's really a good investment from Virginia. I think we kind of need to give the focus on this as a real success story. I think somebody in the Q&A describes this as subsidies for Israeli companies. It couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, we invest from anywhere from $220,000 to $275,000 a year, and that actually allows VIAB to attract billions of dollars in Israeli investment. It's created thousands of high-quality jobs here in Virginia. I mean, there's a study, and I'm sure you're familiar with it, Bob, that the others might not know, but ODU's Dragus Center did an analysis that found that just 4 of the Israeli companies that VIAB helped recruit to Virginia have added more than $6.5 billion to Virginia's gross domestic product, or GDP. So that's a 30,000 to 1 return on investment. It's not the kind of investment number we usually see. So, and we're rightly proud of it as a Jewish community, as a uniquely relationship that helps build bonds between us and Israel. But I think we make the case to the public by talking about the economic success of it. And how do we continue to build on that success? Well, I think we need to preserve the unique structure. Back in 2018, we moved VIAB under the General Assembly, out of the executive branch, sort of to avoid having it get too politicized. And it's stayed in the legislative branch to reinforce its role as an advisor to us in the General Assembly, and provides direct input on how we can improve economic and cultural ties. But it gives the board the opportunity to have a long-term vision. We have a new crew rotating in and out every 4 years. Secondly, I think we need to continue to maintain funding for VIAB at levels that allow it to retain its staff, do the travel it needs to do, and maintain the relationships that they have abroad. I mean, we're not talking about a huge operation here. We're talking about 1 full-time staffer and 1 part-time staff member that have managed to bring Israeli innovators to places like Chesterfield, Russell County, and Stafford County in Virginia. Companies like Zim Shipping and Sabra Dips and Pure Salmon, UVision and Energix, just to name a few. And they made substantial investments, both urban and rural Virginia, not because we gave them money, but because VIAB was able to make the case that Virginia was a very good fit for those companies and for their American presence. And again, the other thing we need to do is resist the temptation to dilute its mission or fold it into a more generalized economic development efforts. And that's some of what you hear folks suggesting. Just, this works so well for Israel, why don't we fold it in? But if you do that, you start to lose some of that focus. We have again, the Virginia Economic Development Partnership does well, but Israel's startup economy and cultural ties to Northern Virginia's Jewish community really do make it unique among these kind of relationships. And with that 35-year history, VIAB really understands the nuances of the community. My understanding is VEDP really appreciates having VIAB there to help close deals because of the targeted focus on these deep relationships that they've had over many, many years. And without that kind of expertise, I don't think these deals would get to the table. So, again, it's an economic success story. And at a time, frankly, when budgets are tightening and we're worried about the economy, with what's happening at the federal level, with the loss of federal jobs, disinvestment of the federal government, the threat of taking jobs out of Virginia and to other parts of the country, we really need to diversify our economy. We've talked about that, for decades around here, but I think it's more critical than ever that we do that. So why would we give up on an organization that's got a proven success record of bringing investment to Virginia, growing the GDP and being a really, really excellent return on investment? So I think we need to, frankly, not be ashamed of it, not hide from it. Let's build on the success stories, advertise the successes that we've had, and really build. I think the new piece of what Viab's been doing is trying to bring in Israeli aerospace industries and some other industries to do accelerator programs to fund things like AI, quantum, and space tech, where Israel has been a real leader. We can leverage their expertise to help make Virginia a leader in those new industries, in those new sectors. So I think we need to continue to do what we're doing, really tout via the Virginia to Israel Advisory Board as a success story, a great return on investment, and an opportunity to diversify Virginia's economy, which I think is something that's going to be critically important over the next several years, given what's happening to our federal workforce.
Thank you, and to the legislature for your support.
Thank you. Judith Fogel, if you can unmute yourself and turn on your camera. Thanks.
Good evening, Erev Tov. I am Judith Fogel. I live in Alexandria. I'd like to thank all of you elected officials who've taken time out of their busy schedules to participate in this critical town hall. My question goes to Chair Kathy Tran. Good evening, Kathy Tran. I am here to talk about security. It has long been a major part of every synagogue, Jewish community center, and Jewish day school's budget. But since October 7, we have seen a dramatic increase in anti-Semitic incidents and violence that has followed. Our security needs for those institutions have only increased. Now, in late June, some of us here on this panel have participated in the Jewish Federations of North America's emergency United for Security fly-in in Capitol Hill regarding the domestic terror crisis targeting the Jewish community, including the attacks that we've talked about in Washington, D.C. and Boulder, Colorado. That fly-in drove home the urgency the Jewish communities nationwide are in desperate need for security funding and protections. And of course, in Virginia, we are not immune to this crisis. So my question to you tonight, Chair, is how can the General Assembly and you, as elected officials with the bully pulpit, help ensure the safety of the Jewish community?
Great. Thank you so much for that question, Judith, and good evening to everyone. I'm part of the crew that left another event right at 6:30, so I am sitting in my car. But I'm Kathy Tran. I represent the 18th House District, which is parts of Southeast Fairfax County. So if you are in Springfield, parts of Springfield, Newington, Lorton, Fairfax Station, then I might be your person. And I'm really glad to join this conversation. Thank you again for having me. When we go to our synagogue, and as you drive up our long winding driveway, we see immediately, right, either local law enforcement or private security that we've had to hire. And that always catches my heart, right? Particularly if I'm the person dropping off my kids at Sunday school or picking them that they need that extra layer of security at a time when we should be focused on learning or our spirituality or taking comfort amongst fellow congregants. And what we've done a couple of things to help increase the fight against anti-Semitism. I just want to lay those out a little bit more. Leader Sorvel started going down that path. I want to talk about our hate crimes grant and what we're doing there. As he mentioned, we have put into law a definition around anti-Semitism. We have also included in our anti-hate crimes definition that you can't commit hate crimes based on ethnicity. That was also part of the concerns that we heard directly from our Jewish community and others, that this was an important piece that we were missing in our protections. And this year, we also passed my bill to ban people from owning a firearm if they have been convicted of a misdemeanor hate crime. And we know that gun violence is on the rise as well. And so unfortunately, that bill was vetoed. We do hope to bring that back. And we this year are requiring the Department of Criminal Justice Services to create best practices and training for law enforcement officers and security officers at nonprofit institutions that face increased hate crime risks to better protect the community. And I think that's going to be an important best practices document for our synagogues and our schools to be taking a look at when that is available. We also have, and I alluded this when I started my answer, it's called the Hate Crime Security Grant Program. It's been in effect for a couple of years. And I think in the last biannual budget, it was funded at about $5 million. And it's to help provide funding for 501c3 nonprofit organizations to help combat hate crimes if that organization's at a particular risk for hate crime violence. And so that requires a partnership between a local government and, for example, a synagogue or a day school or others to apply for that grant. If you are on the board of a synagogue, please know that that deadline is July 30th. And I know the JCRC has incredible experience with this grant program. Please be reaching out to them. I'm actually working with Vicki and her team to help assess, what are ways that we can improve the availability of this grant, make it easier to apply for as we move forward. And so we're exploring that for the next legislative session. I laid out a couple of things we've done legislatively. I think at the heart of the work that I do, and I know many of my colleagues do, is how do we build coalitions to help address this? Requiring security at our place of worship is an issue that we deal with in the Jewish community, but it's also an issue that some of the other religious communities think about as well and have to do. And I know my husband's on the board of our synagogue, right? Like that is a humongous budget line item, is how do we cover that? But it's also this issue that others face. And are there ways that we can work together in partnership to lift up this concern and figure out how we can work together across our religious communities to address it? I think for us, that education and that partnership can help lend itself to some more innovative solutions and make everybody in Virginia safer, including Jews. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Tran.
Thank you so much to both of you. I'm going to now ask Andrea Stillman to turn on her mic and camera, as well as Drew, who is here on behalf of Delegate Helmer.
Thank you so much, Drew, for filling in. We really appreciate it.
Yeah.
My question to you is going to be directed at hate crimes, but I wanted to spend just a minute or two talking about fear. We just talked about security at synagogues, schools, those types of places where Jews gather. But as we know, we're Jewish in other phases of our life, and there are a lot of events that happen in the Jewish community that don't take place in those buildings. My children are between 34 and 40 years old. I hate to say that out loud, but when they were young, I remember being at my synagogue, and during our high holy days, I couldn't listen to anything going on. All I could do was figure out the nearest exit if something had happened because I needed to get to my children. I hadn't thought that way for a long time, but the fear of something happening is very real. I have noticed in my community, people have stopped wearing anything that identifies them as Jewish. My own children and others have taken their mezuzahs off of their doorposts. And I'm involved with a lot of Jewish organizations that have a lot of events and do advocacy. And many people are opting to do it virtually or not coming at all because they're Jewish events. So know that beyond what we're talking about, people, everyday Jewish people minding their own business have become very mindful that just being Jewish makes them fearful. So my exact question to you is, we know that Virginia is not immune from the rising incidence of anti-Jewish hate crimes. In our region alone, we have had Israeli flags repeatedly ripped down by vandals at private homes. Threats have been made against Jewish institutions. Individuals found casing Jewish targets. And of course, while not in Virginia, I cannot go on without mentioning the recent murder of 2 young professionals at the Capitol Jewish Museum. That incident, besides being horrible, was a night of joy for myself. I was in the other side of DC being installed as a new member of the board of the JCRC. So it hit home in many, many different levels for me personally. What has been and can be done legislatively to defend against this upward trend?
First of all, thank you, Andrea, for that question and also for your testimony and story. It's extraordinarily powerful and moving. I'm Drew. I'm with Delegate Helmer. I know he's very sorry he couldn't make it here tonight. I'm going to respond a little bit based on what I know about him and some of the work that he's doing and him and his office are doing in response to the issue around fear and hate crimes for Jews in Virginia today. First, I would say that this is an extraordinarily important issue for Dan. As noted earlier in the call, he has 2 young sons as well, who are one's now in college, school age, who are facing, who are dealing with a lot of these issues around anti-Semitism on campus and in hate crimes today. It's extraordinarily hard for young people facing this. But Dan, he's the son of, it's extremely these issues are extremely important to him. He's a son of an Israeli immigrant. His paternal grandfather was a member of the Haganah who fought under Moshe Dayan during Israel's war for independence. His paternal grandfather and twin sister escaped the Nazis as stowaways on a ship in 1939. And his maternal grandmother, her sister, and their parents, they only escaped by living in hiding during the Holocaust in the hideaway under a dacha in Ukraine. They almost went to Palestine as well, but a young American army officer in Berlin convinced them that the United States would be a safe haven for them, and they could create a better life there. So for Dan, that the relationship between the United States and Israel, these are the only countries that would take them in. This relationship is extraordinarily personal. That's why Dan has been such a strong advocate for protections like the ones that you mentioned and folks on this call mentioned earlier. Last year in 2024, Dan was the chief patron of House Bill 18 that strengthened protections for protected ethnicities, including Jews, in response response to this rising wave of hate crimes. And this year, in this legislative session, Dan was the chief co-patron of Delegate Michael Jones' bill, House Joint Resolution 680, committing the combat and anti-Semitism movement, which passed both houses. I know earlier there was a question around BDS. Dan introduced a bill this year that would crack down on BDS activity on Virginia's public college campuses. Sadly, this didn't pass. But he's planning to reintroduce this next session. So thank you again for your time. I hope I was able to answer your question sufficiently, Andrea. But thank you guys all for your time. Stand for the question.
Thank you so much, Drew. We really appreciate your answer.
Thank you. We're going to move now to Q&A. I want to thank those of you who have already started putting questions in the Q&A box. Feel free to continue doing that while we ask questions. And also there's a raise your hand function that you can go ahead and raise your hand. I'm going to start with school board member Melanie Marin, who has had her hand up. Melanie, can you go ahead with your question?
Yes, I think you can hear me. Yes?
Yep. Yes.
Okay,
yes.
great. Yes, and see me, I hope. Good evening. I really appreciate this very much. And so many of these topics resonate so locally here in Fairfax County. And I want to mention just a few things and ask our very strong advocates in the General Assembly for some, thoughtful, some thoughts on these. So, one is about safety. And I was very vocal about advocating for the funding of the FBI's Wrap Back program, which would fund the real-time background checks for our employees. And unfortunately, after advocating for that funding for 2 years, we realized it wasn't happening, and now we are spending $500,000 a year on this public safety effort to ensure that people who should not be with our children and staff are not in there. So, advocating for safety and security in all the ways is always welcome. Two things that I hear, or three things that I hear a lot from my constituents are, can we have a field trip to the Holocaust Museum downtown? And how do schools decide that? And I've learned that there was funding in the past through the General Assembly for the Holocaust Museum in Richmond, which I didn't even know existed. So I certainly think that that is a resource that we can share more. And I do wonder how that visiting the museum and using those resources could be further spread in Virginia. The other piece comes to teaching and curriculum. Constituents will ask me, what's the required training for teachers when teaching about the Holocaust? And, there is no requirement. And some of our teachers will go into really great programs like Echoes and Reflections, but that is all on their own accord. I am aware that the organization Facing History and Ourselves is looking to expand, and it's working with several large school divisions. So that is something that I wonder, is there in some way, down the road, some funding for that? But lastly, I do want to mention curriculum. And I've been very passionate about social studies curriculum, both because Virginia is the ground zero for slavery, and we must teach it authentically, but also for Holocaust education. And we had spent time in Fairfax County following our policy to identify social studies curriculum. And unfortunately, with local shortfalls in funding, that was a pretty big ticket item that needed to be cut. So rather than having the current curriculum that really moves more forward on truth and history, we had to cut that $15 million. So just some thoughts to our lawmakers and funders, knowing how difficult it is right now. But those are the things that how it plays out in the Commonwealth's largest school division. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. And I'm going to ask in response if each of our elected officials who are here tonight could go ahead and turn on your cameras so the town hall feel can be here and everyone can see.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought it was on. I couldn't see it.
No,
I'm sorry.
not you. I'm sorry. I
Oh.
didn't mean you, Melanie. I meant the panelists. Oh, did we I feel like we may have lost people. No, there we go. Oh, you are on. Okay. I'm sorry, you're not showing up on my screens. So whoever wants to go ahead and get started, please do.
Hey, thanks for the question, Melanie. First of all, Holocaust education has been required in Virginia since 2009. Distinguished Delegate Frank Hall passed a Section 1 bill, House Bill 2409 and 09, that mandated Holocaust education and required every school division to provide grade appropriate portions of that. And I'm sure we didn't fund it, but we did mandate it. And I guess, we can talk about the funding side of it, but I think it's already a requirement in the code. I believe it's already in the SOLs. So students have to be taught about it and have to be tested on it after they've been taught. On the Rat Bag piece, I'm really proud of what we did on Rat Bag. That was actually my legislation in 2021 with Majority Leader Cheryl Herring and I carried a bill. It was sort of an incidental piece of the criminal record sealing bill that we passed. But the Rat Bags, logging into the FBI Rat Bag system is going to be a massive improvement for safety, because as soon as any one of your employees in Fairfax County's public schools is charged with any crime that appears in the Virginia State Police criminal database, you're going to be electronically notified. I know historically we've had problems with the school system receiving notice about sex offenses and some other things. They're now going to receive instant notification of sex offenses, but things like DUIs, if there's an assault and battery, any kind of felony, the electronic notification is going to be great. I understand it's expensive. It also costs the state a lot of money, and the state's charging every school system in Virginia that. It's not just a $500,000 Fairfax County issue. If we were to pay for the system for everybody in the whole state, it would probably cost the state probably north of $6 or $7 million. And so, I recognize, I thought you guys dropped that from your legislative agenda this year anyway, but I think it's a big improvement on public safety that will notify people when anything happens. So happy to talk about it further.
Thank you. I don't know if anyone else wants to weigh in on that or if I should move on. So, all right.
Just to say, Vicky, Adam Eben here, just to say that our budget outlook for the state is a challenging one with federal cutbacks in different areas like Medicaid and SNAP, and that in terms of funding programs, people might tend to have better luck with one-time funding than ongoing funding that's year after year across the entire state. That's not to say that these aren't worthy programs that don't deserve funding. It's a matter of how we find the money among other priorities at a time when the federal government is cutting Medicaid and food stamps.
Thank you. I'm going to now ask Stuart Gibson to join us with a question.
Thank you, Vicky. My concern has to do with something that Senator Survell mentioned, which was the rising tide of anti-Semitism, and he particularly mentioned the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville. But I'm increasingly concerned about the rise in anti-Semitism among Democrats, particularly in the General Assembly. We have people in the Democratic caucus who support Zohran Mamdani for New York mayor, who is an avowed anti-Zionist, anti-Semite, and we're seeing a lot of anti-Israel rhetoric in our own caucus. And we've had issues with Democrats supporting the higher definition of anti-Semitism, where 2/3 of the Democrats in the House of Delegates abstained rather than vote for the bill. So what is the leadership on the Democratic side in the House and Senate doing to address the issue of anti-Semitism in the Democratic caucus?
Hey, thanks for that question, and Stuart, I appreciate you bringing it up. And from my perspective, we went through this a couple of years ago. We went through the whole IHRA question, ethnic hate crime law we passed, et cetera, and it was a complicated issue for a caucus. And I think our caucus, like I think a lot of the public, a lot of members, I think, often need to be reminded about some of the things I talked about. That there can be legitimate criticism of the state of Israel that doesn't necessarily apply to all Jews. That being Jewish is not just a religion; it's also an ethnicity, and it's not necessarily always the same thing. And we need to remind members of these things so they know how to differentiate. I think it's also important to remind members of the shared struggle that a lot of people have been through. Just the other day, I had a town hall meeting where I was teaching people in my district how to remove racist covenants from their land records. As I said, when my grandparents moved to Fairfax County in 1936, the land records basically said they couldn't buy a lot of the houses that had just recently been built because you weren't allowed to buy a house there unless you were a Christian, according to the land records. So one of the things I noticed was that there was a couple neighborhoods in my district that said you also could not buy a house if you were Persian, Armenian, or Syrian. And I brought this up at the town hall, and the professor who was there, I thought it was kind of weird. She brought it up and said, let me explain to you the history of that. And the history of that was that there was a case in 1914 where a Syrian tried to become a United States citizen. But because the United States banned Asians from becoming citizens, they said, you're Syrian, you're Asian, you're out. The Fourth Circuit basically said anybody who is Semitic, Jews, Syrians, Persians, Armenians, are Caucasians. They lumped all of us together as Caucasians. And this was so offensive to the existing population of Fairfax County. They decided to put in their land records that even not only Jews, but even Armenians, Persians, and Syrians couldn't buy a home. My point being is that a lot of us have been through this struggle. A lot of these groups have been through these struggles through the years. We are all together. And one of the reasons my grandparents joined the NAACP when they got to Fairfax County, because they were the only group that had common values that would fight for them for the kinds of things we see together. And I think it's important that as we go through these struggles, we reaffirm these histories and these stories so that people understand the common struggle we've all been through together to get where we are today. So that people, don't forget the history. So I think these are the kinds of things we need to talk about to build support, rebuild those bridges, so we can all fight together the common hatred that many of us feel. Because everybody knows that while it might start with one group, eventually it ends up with us, and we need to fight with all of them together.
I guess I'm certainly grateful not to be in leadership, but I think speaking as one of 51 in the House, and Stuart, I know you appreciate as a former school board member, the ins and outs of having a shared set of values with your colleagues. The Democratic Party is a big tent. And so, I think I certainly welcome suggestions from folks about how they have kind of successfully navigated in their professional and personal lives. When they have people who feel very differently than they do, or who come to the same work with a uniquely different perspective. I think personally, I don't think it's probably unfamiliar to many of you of what we dealt with on the school board in the last iteration. I think the only thing that I know how to do is to have personal conversations to the best of your ability. Because when we stop talking, I think we're letting other people win who are well served by us being just against each other. So I don't, Stuart, I don't know that there's a right answer to your question about what the Democratic Party should do. I know what we have to do, and what we have to do is figure out some way to at least string together some sort of alliance to decide that we are not going to allow people who are, deporting families. We have kids who know that they are they're not sure when they come home if their parents are going to be there. I think that we've got to find a way to bring together some sort of coalition with a shared set of values to make sure that we get people out and continue to vote, and know that not everyone is going to share our values 100%, and that is work that we have to continue to do as Democrats, to have those conversations. And I may never be able to change the perspective of one of my colleagues, though I will say there are many times in these last 2 years, in my first 2 years in the House of Delegates, that I sure have been grateful for that 51st vote, or we would not be enshrining reproductive freedom, the right to abortion, into the Constitution. We would not be enshrining the ability to marry whomever you would like into our Constitution. We would not be returning the right to vote to people who have served their time. So I'm not sure the answer. I welcome any guidance and feedback, but I also know that we have to be so careful not to so alienate the people with whom we do share some core values, or I'm not sure that we're any better than the folks who are in charge at the federal level.
I'm going to follow up on that question with thank you for those responses. And then with the sort of culmination of stuff in the chat, in the Q&A, and then I'll go back to some of the raised hands that I see. But could you each talk a little bit about how you weigh when and how to use your bully pulpit on these kinds of issues? when you hear rhetoric, whether it's within your own party or with it from the region or nationally, how do you decide when is the right time to speak out, and to use that bully pulpit to protect the community, to shut down rhetoric that's just ugly and sometimes dangerous?
Well, let me start, I guess, a little bit to the point. I mean, and some of you are probably just not going to like this answer, but so I'm reluctant to say it, but I'm going to say it. And I think sort of what Laura Jane's getting at is we're in election season right now. I think I'll be partisan for a second. There's nothing Republicans would like more than to watch Democrats at each other's throats right now. It's the only chance they have, is to drive wedges. And I think you see a lot of this is intentionally provocative. And it's done to drive home these wedges and return to a narrative of Democrats in disarray. And I don't want to give in to that. I think that the weaponization of anti-Semitism and doing things under the guise of combating anti-Semitism on our college campuses, for instance, and saying we're doing this to protect the Jewish community. Well, thank you, but no thank you, right? I was just fine with the way things were going at UVA. Obviously, there's some things that can be done. I know, Vicki, you and JCRC have effectively worked with the George Mason University to have the leadership there address the serious issues of anti-Semitism that did occur there in a constructive and positive way. And sometimes the most effective way to make change is not by embarrassing people and calling them out and taking them to task, in a very public way, but sometimes it's nudging behind the scenes, it's working with them, it's educating them, and it's doing things. And so we have to be sort of conscious of a couple of things. One, again, the agenda, I think, of folks on the outside to have us at each other's throats. Two, though, there are certain things that are beyond the pale and can't be tolerated, but we do address those with our colleagues, maybe in ways that you don't see. And again, some people will probably not like that approach. Some people will probably prefer a more vocal, more out front approach, but I think sometimes it's more effective to do it through education, through persuasion, in a more delicate way. And frankly, some people are dying for attention, and they want to bring more attention to their cause, and they're hoping that we'll provide some of the fuel for that. And I think we need to be very thoughtful and strategic about not providing them the fuel that they want to sort of, again, draw more attention to their own cause. And so, I mean, those are sort of the things that I consider when I make a decision about whether to use my bully pulpit or not, to answer your question, or whether to use my powers of persuasion, or whether to use other levers that we have to do things in a more subtle way. So it's difficult, and I think Laura James talks about some of the struggle with that. And I know, it was hard work, and you and I worked very together with the JCRC on the IRA definition. That was a divisive issue within our caucus, and that was something that the way it was originally presented from the governor's office was designed to be a difficult issue. I think we helped craft some language that was more palatable for most folks, but it wasn't without effort. So I get the frustration. I hear it. I hear it from my wife. I hear it from my kids sometimes, that why can't you do more? But those are some of the things we have to consider. And we have to sort of take a long view about what's in the best interest of the Jewish community writ large. And for some of us, it's to do it in ways that don't inflame things as much as some people might like us to. I'm sure others have different thoughts about it, but I figure I'd jump in on that.
Hey, this is Kathy. And, earlier this evening, I heard a quote about a quote that Senator Ghazala Hashmi, our the Democratic Lieutenant Governor nominee, had said. And she said, "Your power is not in the decibel of your voice, but it is in the steel of your spine." And that really resonated with me. And it's a reminder to me that our power as elected leaders, our power as community leaders, as neighbors and friends and people within this community is our values and how strongly we stand by them, and how we help to navigate and be strategic in whether it's a legislative session or whether it is when and how to raise our voice in the best way. And the other reminder I have to tell myself all the time is social media does not represent reality. And if you look at the number of folks, who are engaging in that, and I think there's some legitimate mental health concerns if you're doom scrolling all day, right? Like, it is not the reality. And so if we look at how do we interact with one another when we're in session, how do we interact with one another with our listening ears? And if people are saying things for attention, if people are saying things because there is some pain behind what they're experiencing, whether it's, trauma or loss, and can we share that? Can we find some points of commonality, and how do we move forward? It is important to recognize that the Democratic Party, as in the other side, is our side probably more a big tent party, and that we are not a monolith. That our Jewish American community here in Northern Virginia is not a monolith, and neither are any other communities that we are connecting with or intersecting with. And so I think it's important to understand kind of the whys behind why somebody might say something, tweet something, and votes that they take, and how do we build from there. And I think I try to remain and keep that optimism. But for me, I think what Delegate Simon put it best is in terms of things are, if they're beyond the pale, then I want to speak out. But particularly, I want to keep an eye towards what's happening in the 18th district or here in our Fairfax County, and how I can best be of help there. And if lending my voice to a particular situation is going to elevate it and help it make progress, then I'm glad to do that. But I think that's really important because, quite frankly, there are a number of any number of tweets on any issues that might affect the Jewish community directly or indirectly that we could all jump on any second of the day. So how do we be, most thoughtful and deliberative about that?
Thank you. I don't know if anyone else wants to weigh in before I go to the next question. Okay. Or if it's
Oh,
go
sorry.
ahead.
I just wanted to
Ina.
second. I think I have tried both tactics in my very short-lived life as a politician. And I think tweeting, and being outspoken, I think everyone has a different definition of how you're using your loud voice. For me, my first speech on the floor of the House was about Jews being used as a pawn by the other half of our chamber, who at that time was embracing and supporting a candidate for president who had said some pretty horrifying things, not just about Jews, but about there being very fine people who carried torches and said Jews will not replace us. And so for me, using my bully pulpit was just to talk about what it was like to be Jewish right now, what it was like to be a mom of two Jewish kids right now, and the just utter I think desperation sometimes that you feel as a Jew navigating this world, as a woman navigating this world, as the parent of a trans kid navigating this world, as it turns out this world is full of all kinds of intersectionality, and as Jews we aren't just one thing. And I think the only thing that I know how to do, and bully pulpit, I imagine, means something quite different to some people than others. I would guess that Teddy Roosevelt and I might have different thoughts on how you do it, maybe not. But I don't tend to carry a big stick in public. I tend to save that for private conversations with my colleagues, because I have truly found that the minute that you do that, the minute that your outrage goes on social media or however people would like to hear it, it makes you feel really, really good in that moment. And it makes people who agree with you feel really, really good in that moment. And in that 100 and whatever 40 words, what you also find is that you have alienated a lot of people who are willing to help you and carry some of the water, I think, in your life on all kinds of other things, who might be willing to listen, who maybe it's more ignorance than it is malice. And so I know there are people who, as a Jew, want me to speak out more right now in this moment. And you also see that every person on this call, we're what you have. This is us, 140 of us, and you're talking to all the Jews. So we do our best to work together and to be who you need us to be who we think we need to be, representing our community, representing our larger community of our district. We do our best. And I think that if people want people who scream at one another, they have some people that they can continue to support, but it doesn't tend to be the 5 people on this call. So I don't know. It means something different to everybody, but I think we all navigate being members of this community as best we know how in this moment.
Thank you. Before I go on to what I think will be our last question, somebody asked about the recording, and I just want you to know that the recording of this conversation will be on our YouTube channel tomorrow, for anybody who needs or wants to access it. And as I finish up, I also want to let you know that we will be dropping into the chat a document with everybody's contact information. Tonight's conversation is really just the beginning. There are lots of ways throughout the year that we can all participate in the democratic process that protects the country, the state, as well as the Jewish community. And we'll have some suggestions in there, including participating in our legislative breakfast and our advocacy day when we go as a community in February down to Richmond during the General Assembly's general session. And we'll speak to these 5 as well as many others on that day about issues that we are looking to see passed at the General Assembly. So please take a look at that when it's dropped in the chat. I think Alan just dropped it in there. And keep in touch with the JCRC, with your elected officials. And with that, I'm going to unmute Irv so you can ask your question.
Thank you very much, Vicky. Good evening. This is Irv Arconi. I chair the Fairfax County Democrats Jewish Caucus and was a past board member of JCRC. That's a wonderful conversation. I had 2 questions, but one which was on Holocaust education, but that was answered earlier. And I do hope that we can do more to equalize how much education there is, which needs funding. But the second one was really a question I had, and all of you began talking about this with regarding to free speech and how we are talking about it. My question is to our legislators, how do you all feel about the federal government seemingly leveraging the fight against anti-Semitism, which is a wonderful thing and necessary thing, but as a way to perhaps suppress legitimate free speech? Not the speech of those who are clearly threatening Jewish students, but those who are disagreeing with current policies, such as with Israel. Would this potentially lay the blame for suppressing free speech on Jews and then cause other members of our community, perhaps other religious members, to blame Jews for this, when it really involves political opportunists? And some of you have talked about that. So is there a role that the General Assembly can take on this with regard to federal actions in Virginia? Thank you.
Vicky, can I address that?
Yes, please do.
Okay, Adam Eben here. I wanted to say that all of the Jewish members of the General Assembly and those with Jewish families had signed on a letter addressed to the George Mason University Board of Visitors commending President Greg Washington for his work with the JCRC and with the Hillel on campus in fighting against anti-Semitism and speaking out against weaponizing the federal government weaponizing what they say is the fight against anti-Semitism as a way to target a university president who we feel is doing a good job. So I appreciate Irv's question, thoughtful way he posed it. and just to say that I agree with his concerns and that they're shared, I think, not just by me, but by all of the Jewish members of the General Assembly who signed on to that letter that we submitted to GMU's Board of Visitors yesterday.
Thank you. I don't know if anyone has anything to add to that.
I just want to add, I think it's really important if you see the weaponization of the fight against anti-Semitism, you got to call it out, right? You might recognize that because you are, critically reading the news, but sometimes folks don't realize that, and then they become a pawn. And that's what, Delegate Cohen was alluding to in her remarks earlier. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us to call that out. We actually, following on Senator Eben's comment, we had a joint House Senate leadership press conference today to denounce the political attacks that this federal administration is taking and directing here in Virginia. We have a #1 public university system in the country, and we just, not we here on this call, but they forced out President Jim Ryan at UVA, and now they have set their sights on President Gregory Washington, and so at GMU, if you haven't followed the news on that. And I think we need to be able to help and educate our constituents as to what's happening. We don't necessarily are able to control the actions of the federal government. These investigations are being led by the Department of Justice. But I know that I think both chambers have an interest in really looking at the process we use to the governor makes recommended appointments for the boards of visitors, and we confirm them. So we have an intention to relook at that process so that we are confirming folks who are ready, able, and willing to carry out their duties of standing up for the university or institution that they have been appointed to protect. I think that's directly related to your question right now, because we see that playing out at GMU right now.
I just want to quickly add, or I agree with your concern about where this leads us and how it actually could lead to more anti-Semitism. I know that's a concern that was raised in the forum at Lord of Shalom. And Rabbi Schwartzman has sort of shared that same concern. I think it's something that's worth thinking about, that the fact that all this is being done in the name of the Jewish community and protection of the Jewish community has the potential to have the opposite effect of what's intended, and where people do start to associate a lot of these anti-freedom, anti-academic freedom, anti-upward social mobility, DEI movements with the Jewish community, because it's being done in our name. I think it can actually lead to exacerbating anti-Semitism and have the opposite of what's the stated effect. And I think it's something we need to be aware of, and I appreciate you raising it.
All right, anybody else on that one? All right. Thank you. I want to now just give an opportunity for each of you to just say a few remarks as we're closing up. So I'm going to go in reverse order of seniority, in part because I know that Delegate Cohen needs to head off immediately at 8. So Delegate Cohen, if you would go ahead and just some closing remarks.
Thanks so much. I think we all struggle to balance our jobs that sort of help pay the bills with the ones that do a lot of good for our hearts, but not as much for our bank accounts. So I appreciate you letting me jump off at 8 for my next Zoom. But I just wanted to say how much I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I really cannot say enough about the work that JCRC does. I think we found ourselves in a fast friendship and mutual admiration society when we started to work on the Jewish calendar. And again, a big thank you to School Board Member Marin for all of the hard work that she did in us doing that. And it was a 2-year process that was painful, that did teach me a lot of lessons, actually, to the question about using the bully pulpit, but a lot of lessons about how to govern in a way that brings people along with you, even when you really would actually like to say some choice words publicly. So I just appreciate like always being a resource, and just always really living the values of trying to bring everybody together to make sure that we're listening to each other and we're hearing different perspectives. I think that is the best thing about this job that those of us legislators here on the call have been given the opportunity to do, getting to talk on every door, getting to have all these folks who come to your office to meet with you and give you perspectives maybe about things that you have really never spent as much time thinking about as they certainly have. And the folks on this call, I mean, you know, Irv is a frequent flyer in my office and advocating for all of the incredible things that make us better as human beings and as legislators. So, you know, I think we have this unique opportunity. We are imperfect, so we ask your forgiveness. We are imperfect people, imperfect legislators, and speaking for myself, certainly an imperfect Jew. And I always appreciate the grace that the community has given me in trying to navigate being a Jewish mom in this space. So thank you so much. And as Vicky said, I really hope this is the beginning or the continuation, for those of you I've had the opportunity to speak with, to continue talking. Please don't feel like you can't speak to me if you're not a resident of HD 15. I hope that you will still reach out and let's continue talking. And thank you again. I hope that we'll get the opportunity to be on many more of these. So thanks again, Vicky and JCRC.
Thank you. Delegate Simon.
I'm muting myself. There we go. Thank you guys again for doing this and doing the forum. Yeah, I apologize to the folks. I know I've been looking at the Q&A. I know there's a lot of good questions from a lot of folks that we didn't get a chance to get to. And so I do appreciate what Vicky said earlier, and that this is the beginning of a conversation and not just the end all be all here. And happy to continue to have these, and maybe smaller formats and fewer of us at a time, so you guys can get to have some more different kinds of conversation. I won't say better, but different kinds of conversation. But this has been a great opportunity. This is a difficult issue. I mean, it's a difficult time to be Jewish. It's difficult for a lot of us, a lot of folks in groups, but you know, it does feel like you were walking a fine line and getting, you know, hit from both sides all the time. And I know that and feel that, and personally, you know, experience it again with one recent college graduate and one recent college entrant. You know, we're living it in real time in our households as well. So appreciate the opportunity to meet with everybody and talk these issues through, hear from you all. And I know you'll continue to buttonhole me at synagogue and other places and have these conversations one-on-one, and I welcome them. And a chance to also have more events like this, the similar different formats as we continue through the election season and towards the General Assembly session.
Thank you. Chair Tran.
Thanks so much, Vicki, for organizing this conversation tonight. I think it's really invaluable. I learned a lot from the questions, and I hope that our comments were helpful to you. And I just want to appreciate everybody for hopping on this evening. I know you've come from a long day as well, and so really appreciate your interest and your advocacy. And I think the most important thing that we each have is our voice. Some of you might look at me and be like, why is she on this call? So I identify as as a member of a Jewish family. I just want to, and you know, as a mom of 5 kiddos, we're having our 3rd B'nai Mitzvah this year. But then we get a break because the next one is the next child's only 8, so we have a couple year break. These are issues that we are grappling, as Delegate Simon said, similar to my family in real time, but a little bit younger. And how do you talk about what it means to be Jewish, to live Jewishly, to hold sacred your values today with kids who are almost 5 to 16, right? And part of that is, and then, you know, when you talk about intersectionality, and that's probably why I come to the work I do in this manner, is how do we build those coalitions? How do we build allies to further, you know, the value of tikkun olam, to repair this earth, and particularly right now where it's so turbulent and chaotic, and there's so much concern. I think that there's a lot of really good work we can do within this community and in partnership with others who share those values. So I look forward to listening more and to seeing you, whether it's for coffee or in the General Assembly next year. So I really appreciate it. My door is always open.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Eben.
Thank you, Vicky, and thanks to JCRC for organizing this opportunity tonight. I appreciated the thoughtful questions, and I'm still thinking about using the bully pulpit and how we do that better without driving ourselves crazy with doom scrolling and feeling the need to respond to each and every outrage that crosses our desks or computer screens. But it's difficult. Someone said it was a difficult time to be Jewish. I think it's a difficult time to be in public life, and it's a difficult time for all Americans who are thoughtful about what's going on in this country to engage in a way that is thoughtful and meaningful and have an impact without driving ourselves crazy. So I thank everyone for their indulgence tonight and for the thoughtful questions and for sharing their experiences. Thanks again for having us.
Thank you. And Senator Sorovel.
Thanks, Vicky. And first of all, I just want to note that I am not the senior member on this call. Senator Eben is. I might have a leadership title, but Eben has served in the legislature, I think, 4 years longer than I have. So he is the senior Jew in the legislature, not me. But appreciate the opportunity to have dialogue here with you all tonight. I always find our interactions with JCRC to be very enlightening and helpful. And the advocacy you all do in Richmond is extremely important. I can't underestimate that. And I was really excited that when I heard we were going to have this town hall meeting tonight, because I've been very frustrated for like the last, I don't know, probably 2 years now. The current administration has in Richmond, and now with the Trump administration, I feel like trying to co-opt anti-Semitism for basically a political agenda. And I think that we need to continue to talk and figure out ways to make sure that what's going on there doesn't end up having long-term negative consequences. I think we've had some dialogue about that tonight. I think we need to continue that dialogue. I'm also excited to note that I'm going to be traveling to Israel next month. Excited to do that. Take a trip. Israeli government invited a lot of us to go over there, part of a 50-state delegation. And I'm really looking forward to that learning experience. And when I come back, I hope to be further fortified to have dialogue and continue to advocate and change minds here in our Commonwealth. And thanks for letting me be here tonight and having this forum. Let's keep having them.
Thank you so much. I want to thank everybody who joined us tonight, and I do want to apologize to Senator Eben that I misspoke when I listed the seniority.
No offense taken.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you everybody for joining us. I think this has been a really good conversation, and I'm glad that there's general agreement that it is just one of many. The JCRC has had several town halls this fall, and we are working on some additional ones that will bring our community closer to our elected officials, federal, state, and local. So thank you for being here. Please check out the document that was dropped in the chat, and please stay in touch.